Hey, listeners, you know we've got a Patreon, right? Where supporters get early access to all our podcasts, bonus episodes, discounts on merch, and access to the Feminist Frequency Discord? Well, now you do. Get all this fun stuff while supporting our show at patreon.com/femfreak. That's FEMFREQ.
Maybe that's the spiritual aspect of Morrison's novel. She's saying that no matter what happens, the material is spiritual, and maybe our job in this life is to figure out who we are, what our path is, and once we've done that, then it's time for us to go.
Hello and welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm taking over hosting duties today because I told Anita, in lieu of reparations, the least you could give me during Black History Month was the opportunity to be unshackled from the guest host chair. Today's topic is one that gets me way too excited, as you can already hear from my voice. It is my absolute favorite book in the world, Song of Solomon. Stay tuned for the magic.
I thought that one of the reasons that writing out of and within African American culture was precisely this load of information from everywhere. In my own family, the mixture between, in the language, there was street language, there was sermonic language. You know, people actually quoted the Bible to you as a child and said, you know, nothing is more, and I'm not going to remember one of them, but they had biblical phrases in regular conversation. Or they had lyrics from songs. Or they had journalism. So that they pulled from everywhere.
Over the next few weeks, Anita and I are going to be dipping in and out of virtual theater and, movies and tackling art outside of the realm of TV and film. And we're launching that move with today's episode on Nobel Prize-winning writer Toni Morrison's 1977 novel, Song of Solomon. It was her third to be published and tells a tale of Blackness in America that is breathtaking in its power and beyond evocative in its lyricism. Set in the first half of the 20th century, Song of Solomon is the story of Robert Milkman Dead and his growing alienation as revelations about his family and friends shock him into knowledge that causes him to question everything he has ever known. But the book is about so much more, including the multi-generational trauma that burrows into the skin and souls of Black folks and the storytelling that has sustained our communities. Joining me to talk about the novel are returning guest, Dr. Tai Coleman, and programs manager of the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, Jae Lin. Hey, y'all.
Hi.
All right, let's get into it. So we had a roughly 15, 20-minute pre-talk before we even started recording. I've been waiting for this episode for so long. As I said in the intro, Song of Solomon is my favorite novel ever. It is always the one that I recommend to people who have never read Morrison before and want to start. There are specific reasons why I don't recommend Bluest Eye or Jazz or Sula, which are novels that I love just as much, but occupy a different sort of space for me. I always recommend Song of Solomon. I am excited to talk about it with y'all, particularly you, Jay, because you said that this was your first time reading it, correct?
Yes.
But you had read Morrison before. So, Ty, before I get into you, who has read the book many times before, and we'll be able to talk about, Toni Morrison in a more, sort of more global fashion about her work, in general, as opposed to just this novel. I would love to hear from you, Jay, your first impressions of having read this.
Ooh, so many.
No pressure.
Where to even begin? Yeah, I mean, I think complicated stories about trauma that are intergenerational like this, that are not so clear cut on, good versus evil, and especially that explore almost like the mythology of trauma and the way that the way that the stories that we tell each other about each other and about ourselves have so much to do with what we're carrying, even when we don't know that's what we're carrying, and what we're seeking, and where we find it, and all of, I don't know, that was very, very vague, but I'm just, so much is running through my head.
Yeah.
This book, at every turn, it it as soon as you get a little bit settled and like, okay, here's where we're going, or okay, I'm learning a little bit more about this character in this direction or this story, it always kind of leaves you with a springboard to what's coming up next. And that was delightful and to experience a narrative that way, but also quite heart-wrenching.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't give any kind of summation, of the book, any kind of synopsis, because it is an incredibly hard book to summarize. It is loosely the story of Milkman Dead, a young Black man who gets his name because he is seen breastfeeding from his mother by someone outside of the family when I believe he is 4 or 5 years old, at an age when some people consider it inappropriate to still be breastfeeding. And so the nickname he is given, and we know how powerful nicknames are in the Black community, he becomes known as Milkman Dead. It is the story of his, as I said, growing alienation from his family, from his community, as he learns things about his mother, his father, the relationship that his sisters have with their lives and how they have, been forced to sacrifice for him, about this, mythical treasure that he believes is owed to him, the way that he is frustrated at every turn by forces without and within. It's an incredibly difficult book to summarize in that way, but it is also so funny. I think, there are ways in which anything outside of the mainstream, and by mainstream, I mean white, right, is presented to us as medicine. So read these books because it's good for you. Read these books because they are important, not because you will enjoy this book, not because this book will make you laugh, it will make you cry, it will make you feel something. But read this book because it's on your syllabus. Read this book because, somebody told you to read it, right? And so, I want to encourage folks who have never read this book, who have never read Toni Morrison before, to please just try it for yourself. Like, just get into it. But I want to throw to you and ask you, you just recently reread the book. So what kind of things do you recall from the first time you read it that then, and what did you pick up on this latest go round, that perhaps was different from the first time you read it?
As long as I can qualify in another 10 years, I can answer the question differently. The first time I read it, I was doing a radio show, community radio show, and I was actually reading it on air to my listeners. And I wasn't a mother, hadn't had any children. And the first thing I could never forget was just the breastfeeding scene, right? That was something that stuck with me, and seeing Milkman as a victim. This time around, I think I saw it more for the epic that it is. That you're right, it loosely tells the story of Milkman making dead, right? But there's a way in which it is that epic, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, that tells a human story of individual choices in larger social conditions about fate, whether or not it's right or wrong, but the thing that man in general, right, faces, and the choices that we make and who we become based upon the choices that are available to us. And I felt that I could see past that breastfeeding scene that was clearly inappropriate, because I breastfed my child till she was almost 2 years old. And I can remember when she turned my breasts away, I felt so rejected, right? And I had to understand that that was about me, and not that I would be Ruth, but I could see, the compassion and empathy. So I saw the epic, I saw the journey that maybe helped me understand why some things happen. Just like Milkman, as he gets to the end of the story, he seems more compassionate and empathetic to his mother and his father. So I felt like I could see more of that, if that makes sense, because I'm older and, I have 3 children, but also I'm a Black woman, more aware of the choices that I have, which have been shaped by the racism and the classism and the sexism of the society I live in, but also the limited choices that my ancestors had, similar to Milkman.
Yeah, and yet for all of the troubles in this book, for all of the ways in which the action of the novel is mapped onto the history of this country, which means for Black people, a history of violence and oppression and being turned inside out and being dehumanized. The book ends on what is ultimately not just an ambiguous note, but for me, it's such a hopeful note, right? You know, that like his ancestor, Suleiman, Milkman has now found it within him to fly. He has been released from shackles. I want to let's get into it. Like, I don't want this to be, you know, your grandma's graduate seminar, right? So let's loosen it up. Let's talk about this book. Let's talk about just the Black ass business that goes on in this. And I'm inviting you into this space, Jae, because I trust, you know, you as a reader, you know, to have, you know, taken the time to really, you know, receive what the book is offering. But I don't want this to be just me, you know, speechifying on this podcast. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Pilate Dead.
You don't want to be the sage on the stage?
Listen, I am like that through the majority of my daylight hours. So I'm gonna loosen it up with y'all.
Well, before we talk about Pilate, though, can we also say, too, as a work of fiction, Toni Morrison is not, you know, is creating a work of fiction that you can read as pleasure, but I also want to say that she's creating a historical artifact, right? In the face of trauma, where oftentimes there's no evidence of what happened, and people will tell you, what are you talking about? You're crazy. That didn't happen. Why are you doing what you're doing? I want to also posit that she's also providing evidence or documentation to support the historical and generational trauma and violence done toward a group of people, and then how that violence gets internalized to themselves and to the relationships with the people that they love. So with that, we can pivot to Pilate if it's okay. I just wanted to make that point. I think it's important.
No, I think that's a good point, because, you know, what you're saying is absolutely accurate, right? And what she does not do is offer the sort of, you know, evidence for what has gone before in a way that perhaps is palatable or acceptable to the mainstream, right? So she is still doing it through fiction. She is still doing it through myth making, still doing it through storytelling. She is not offering an anthropological study. She is not offering a journal article. What she is doing is saying, this is no less valid as a way of capturing truth and disseminating truth. And if you choose not to accept it, that does not lessen the reality of it. One of the things that is so important for people to wrestle with as you talk about literature like that of Toni Morrison, like, you know, Toni Barbara, like, you know, so many other like Black luminaries, right?
Who she published, right? She was the editor for Toni Barbara. That's right.
Is the way that the publishing literati will use terms like magical realism with this very colonialist mindset that dismisses and diminishes the types of storytelling that exist outside of white European culture, right?
Come on now, tell us.
And so when the things that happen in this novel, although they may appear to outsiders to be supernatural, although they may appear to exist purely in the realm of myth, who is to say that Suleiman and Milkman did not actually fly? Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yes.
That, you know, that she refuses to take like the outsider's point of view and assert that, these things are meant to be read as symbols only, as metaphors only, you know?
Because what's more mythical than white people creating race and then enslaving people simply because of the color of their skin for centuries? That's just as magical as birds flying around, right? So yeah,
right.
I think you're right, and I like that, and I think, you know, the previous podcast, I think that's a special thing. At least I've had the pleasure of having discussion with you all that you're willing to entertain. So in thinking about Pilate, right? I mean, how dare you have one of the protagonists, or not protagonists, but main supporting characters of the novel named after the person responsible for sentencing Jesus Christ to death? Even before we start, there comes the baggage. So when I see her, you assume initially she's a questionable character, but you know, throughout the text, in some ways, she exists as a foil or an ability to help Milkman transform, because you see her strength, right? And it's not about being perfect, but how does she manage to survive through what experiences that have happened to her? And I think in thinking about her, I remember finding her like unattractive, but this time around, seeing the power and how maybe she was one of the characters closer to nature than the other characters. And maybe that allowed her to thrive and survive. And the simple fact of that, she knew her name and she understood who she was.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, in many ways, she births herself and gives herself life, right? So Pilate has no navel. The way that she understands what has happened to her, the way that she holds on to memory, runs counter to the way that her brother, was previously the closest person in the world to her, has held on to memory. And it is through her that Milkman ultimately achieves the revelation that sets him free. But she is also she is a truth teller and a truth sayer in the most iconic tradition of Black mamas and Black aunties, right? Like, she is the one who will tell Milkman about himself. Milkman has grown up in this privileged space, and one of the things that I love about this novel is the way that it does not flatten the Black experience to simply the inner city, to rural, to poor, or whatever. It shows the breadth of Black experience in this country.
Milkman, and even the conflict between Black characters. I mean, look at what happens between Guitar and Milkman. But no, I think Pilate is right. Like, she's the only one that sees the truth, but I also think she understands the detriment of a lie, right? In the sense that in an attempt to change the lie, how does that deny your own existence, your own experience? And all of the other characters are attempting to accept the lie and to find redemption in the lie, in a sense, whether it's the pursuit of gold or money, the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of love outside of self, right? Like Hagar, all of that will kill you. It'll either kill you literally, right? Or it'll kill you on the inside spiritually, as opposed to having the courage to deal with the reality and not being afraid to use magic or a lack of convention to do that. Notice how she deviates from what is considered the norm or expected or the norm of the day in order to survive. And maybe if she hadn't done that, she wouldn't be able to survive. Because in one sense, she's probably one of the healthiest characters mentally and psychologically in the novel.
Yeah, and I think there's so much, there's a question asked over and over again in this book around what is natural, what is unnatural, what is supernatural, right? And I feel like I definitely see Pilate as this home for all three, in a way that many of the other characters are struggling with, one or two of each. And so for her, as someone who is yes, so close to nature, so comfortable in the world and in her own embodiment, but yet rejected for being unnatural, of you are not something God made because you don't have a navel, or you are somehow less human because of this, and then also the supernatural. I feel like I see a comfort in her with the supernatural and the ghosts and the mythology and the storytelling and ancestry that the book is grappling with. That just feels, I don't know. I just really feel like she finds a home for all of these questions in her characterization. That even though she isn't center stage in a lot of the book, it ends up feeling like so much of it is kind of swirling around her.
Yeah. Well, she's the snake, right? Milkman says she's a snake, and then we get the story, and and this is where you see Morrison pulling on folklore, because I was told this story by my grandparents, right? You knew I was a snake when you picked me up, but at least the snake is a snake, right? You know what you're getting. But there's something, I like what you say, Jay, about her connection to nature, and I feel like her rules are very simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So the life you take, right? So in the sense that she's carrying the bones, and then she gives Milkman Hagar's hair, it's not about this kind of punitive sense, but know that every action has a reaction. Every choice has a cost. So you can have what you want, you can do what you want, but then can you be willing to accept and carry in your life psychologically, emotionally, the consequences of those choices? And then look at all the characters, how they're making choices, but aren't necessarily having or being able to handle the consequences of the choices that they made, and whether those choices are limited or not, right? And it always is interesting to me. What does she say? If that person would eat cherries, they wouldn't have to wear those glasses, right? That moment, very witchy, right? But then I wanted to look up, I was like, well, what's in cherries? Maybe, that's true. So I found myself at this age, like being more serious and kind of looking it up, right? Because she's not only using historical facts, but then these small things. And so in some ways, I don't know if I would call Pilate the trickster character, but she is, and I don't necessarily want to say witch, but I don't think witch is a bad thing. But Jay, maybe you're right. This notion of what is supernatural, what is natural, what is real, and maybe the only thing that's real is us accepting what the consequences of our choices. And if we can do that, we can do anything, right? Like flying, or also what? Killing, misusing love, taking another person's life, or being greedy, right? All those things. I think what shocked me is that I didn't expect for her to die. I mean, I think that was
yes, because because she has overcome so much, and because she seems in some ways to exist outside of the realm of like normal human bodies, normal human, and I say normal in quotation marks, right? It is almost as if I didn't believe that she could die, that she would not simply transcend in some way. But yes, Pilate walks in a world in which the supernatural and the natural are woven into each other. They are laid over on top of each other. They are not something that you step from one to the other. You are always at all times walking in both. And so it is through that revelation that she is then able to share with Milkman, that then he is able to do what needs to be done to free himself. But I want to go back to something you said, Tai, about consequences and about the life you take will cost another life, right? Every action has a consequence. If you don't get the message there, Morrison is going to make sure you get it through the 7 days, right? And I remember gasping when I first read this book. I think I was a sophomore in college. It is breathtaking. It is chilling. And yet that is precisely what is happening, right? It is that spiritual and bodily economy made explicit through the work of the 7 days. So if you have not read the novel,
it's a holy number, it's a God number. So seven
yeah,
is the number of Jesus.
If in the world of the novel, there is an organization, not like the Elks or something like that, but a secret underground organization who enact vengeance upon white people for the extrajudicial, violent killings of Black people. So if there is a Black child who is killed, then a white child will be. And the point of it is that it is random. The point is that those consequences are always due. The cost is always due. So yeah, that's something that Morrison keeps returning to in the novel.
But they also pay a cost, right? Is it Guitar who they have this whole discussion of what's natural and what's unnatural, right? To maim someone, to cut off scrotum, take people's body parts the way Black people are killed and fetishized, right? And we know this from the novel. We know this of history. It was quite common when Blacks were lynched that they would take ears or their penis or their scrotum or their fingers and send them or keep them as keepsakes. They would take pictures and send them as postcards, right? There's a wonderful series called Without Sanctuary, right? Which traveled the nation, and it's collected in a book now. And there's a lot of controversy over that, whether or not we should continue to show those images. So I do think there's a whole thing in the book about what's natural, what's not natural. And I don't know if Morrison or if the novel necessarily answers that question, but it is a real backdrop into which what Milkman as a character, has these choices to decide what he's going to do about it. But thinking about Pontius Pilate and going back to Pilate as a character, think about Pilate as a character that finds Jesus guilty, right? And then, of course, he is crucified, right? And in some ways, Milkman is crucified, right? And he comes back to life. There is kind of Jesus thing that he has going on. But when she dies, I guess I think about maybe that's the spiritual aspect of Morrison's novel. She's saying that no matter what happens, the material is spiritual, and maybe our job in this life is to figure out who we are, what our path is, and once we've done that, then it's time for us to go.
Mm.
And that's really profound, right? But also think about it, it's 1977. It's 2 years, before the bicentennial celebration of the Declaration of Independence, 2 years from the publication of Song of Solomon. You will have Octavia Butler's Kindred, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
this whole notion, what does it mean to be free? So around this time, I would think Morrison is kind of, if I'm outside critic, thinking of 1977, the pitfalls of the Black Power movement, right? What has come out of that? Things haven't happened the way we thought they would. And what else do we have left to live for? What is it that we're supposed to be if we don't have access to citizenship, which I think in the novel really isn't a question for the characters outside of the discussion of slavery. What else is there for us to aspire to than what this human experience is? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's our journey to figure out how to fly, and what it looks like for us. Because if anything, Pilate was interesting, but I always felt like at least she was flying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She didn't give a what about anything else, but it didn't mean that what her kids, Hager couldn't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and sometimes it'd be like that if you allow me to say it, but also I'm comfortable in saying I don't necessarily understand it, right? Maybe that might be the next time we reread the text, but definitely thinking about this epic journey that African Americans, if you allow me to be didactic, that we've gone on, but I would say by 1977, but also by the novel, we still haven't as a nation figured it out. So maybe Toni Morrison is saying, even if we haven't figured it out as a nation, it's worth individually figuring out what it means for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they can't figure it out, forget them. You get to figure out what it is for you and what it looks like for you, no matter what anybody else thinks. And to me, that's profound, because at the end of the novel, we know that Milkman will leap, but we don't know if he will. So flying is not, it might not actually be actual flight, but maybe it's inside the spirit and the soul, like no longer having that fear. And think about it, the novel opens with the flight, right? The suicide of Mr. Smith, the insurance agent, and it ends with the flight of Milkman, who's born right on that day, but it's a different kind of flight. But the cool thing about it is that both Black and white men, if we want to posit them as these binaries, right? And we understand that all racial identity, there are multiple racial identities in between that no matter what, we all have the ability to take flight, no matter what our position, if you just believe. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to talk so much.
No, I was into it. So Jae, you said that you've read other Morrison before, right? I would love to hear from you your thoughts on how you're starting to slot this in mentally with the other Toni Morrison that you've read, whether that's in terms of like characters that resonate with you, a particular writing style that calls to you, the way that Morrison grapples with history. I would love to hear how you're sort of understanding Song of Solomon in the corpus of her work.
Can I take this question a different direction?
Take it home. Take it, homie. Take it.
Quite an interesting answer to that. Because yes, I have read Bluest Eye, but it was a long time ago, and it feels fuzzy in my memory. But in terms of just like in Black American literature canon, so much of what this book and also what you've said, Tai, today has evoked in me makes me think of The Color Purple by Alice Walker, especially in terms of like the epic quality, in terms of like just how long it spans and how it shows the like generations and the life cycles of trauma, harm, being in community, being in family, all of that. Because thinking about Pilate and consequences of, she does get to have an arc, that she does carry this bag of bones, right? That she feels like this belongs to me, and it is something that she feels differently about at different stages in her life, right? She carries it for almost a lifetime, from her teens until she's almost 70, I think, at the end. And sometimes that's a thing, it's a weight on your back as you're walking from town to town. And sometimes it's something that you kind of just hit your head on as you're walking around in your kitchen. And then also there may be a time where it's time to let it go. And it's time that you kind of give it proper burial and give it a send off. And I think about, and that also evokes so much of what The Color Purple really like brought into my heart of, you know, what it really means to experience something traumatic or do something horrible and violent and abusive, and to live with that, and to stay with it, and to carry it, and to transform it. I don't know how many spoilers of Color Purple we can get into, but you know, there's also similar.
This podcast is spoiler filled. Okay, we're riddled with spoilers.
Yeah, but but you know, like I think about like the scene at the end of Color Purple where I don't know, I'm bad at character names, but the main character sits on the porch with the man who raped her and beat her all those years, and there is just a profound sense of peace there, and I think that peace is so much better a mirror to the consequence and the carrying and the carrying of it than is something maybe like forgiveness or forgetting, which I think a lot of white narratives of trauma tend to focus on. And I don't know. So that's what's cooking for me in terms of themes across books.
I love that because, you know, Milkman is a punk. Like, he is a punk, right? You know, he is entitled, he is spoiled, he is coddled, he is cosseted his entire life. And he behaves like, you know, a young man who has been raised with the expectation that everything will always cater to him. You know, it has become the water that he swims in, to the point that he does not even realize that other people have had to minimize and shrink themselves, most notably his sister. And I love when, is it First Corinthians or Magdalena called Lena? You know, when she calls him out, and it's just like, do you know what your birth did to me? How it has shut things down for me, you know? I was just like, oh, preach, okay.
Well, think of Morrison, right? Is it by 1963, you know, she marries her sweetheart who's an architect. And while she's pregnant, he decides to go back to Jamaica. And she, you know, stays in the States with her family, and they split. And when I was reading this the second time, you know, trying to get to the tea, and of course, you know, it doesn't have to be with the author, she does a commentary on relationships, right? And yes, it is kind of heteronormative, but she talks about that Black men find their masculinity in abusing the love of Black women. And that is profound, almost as if she's saying, what are some of the social relationship subsequent consequences of the dysfunction of slavery, right? Here you have Solomon who leaves his wife, and you could understand why he's leaving, but then the sense of abandonment, and then how in those relationships, whether it's father or brother or sister or wife or lover, Black women are abandoned by Black men. And so in the sense that the bones are literal and figurative, right? Because, you know, what's that old saying, where are the bones buried? And part of the trauma of slavery is that there are no memories, there are no bones, you're not attached to anybody. You don't even have the respect or the grace of that. So in some ways, the bones then become a physical, metaphorical reminder throughout the entire text that put that ancestry, put that past at rest, put it to death, heal it, right? Somehow bridge that gap so that you can move forward. And maybe for many people who are subject to trauma that's generational, maybe that's part of the challenge that we have. We have to figure out how to do that in order to live our lives and to stand in the present time. And that's another thing that she does, right? This subversion of time. So as you're talking about The Color Purple, right, in these letters, it is this kind of recursive, non-Western notion of time, that the past is always present, and this notion of when are things happening, right? Which, you know, and I hate to go here, so don't beat me up, but I think about theorists, and I'm going to say it one time, like Jacques Derrida, and, you know, the deconstructionist who says that time is some made up stuff. Here you see for people of color, it is, because everybody in the book has to tell you what happened, right? Everybody got a backstory, and you can't keep going forward till you figure out what that backstory is. So all these characters have a foot in the past and a foot in the present, but even then their stories are problematic, because, for example, you hear Ruth's story about when her father died and he was on his deathbed, versus her husband thought that she was doing something, you know, inappropriate with him. And so who's telling the truth, right? So all of this, and then you have a character like Milkman, who you're right, is this pompous ass, but who wouldn't be an ass if you were born into this crazy stuff? And then on top of that, you have to be Black, whatever that means.
Right.
And then you have to apologize for not being the right kind of Black, right? As well as the physical challenges. Yeah, so it's just all over the place. And in some ways you want Morrison to give you relief. You say, please give me some relief, give me some way out. And she doesn't. I mean, to the very end, even then she doesn't give you relief. So I'm not mad at her for that, but man, it's you're glad you read it, but it's frustrating.
And you talk about stories, right? And what and how this is a story and this is a work of fiction, but then stories within the story are like such a crucial part of the narrative. And then also remembering what both of y'all were talking about earlier, of how, yes, this is a work of fiction, and how maybe it doesn't slot into, Western ideas of anthropology, of historical, records or whatever. But I don't know, yet it still is a historical artifact that Morrison is creating. And I think through, I don't know, with the intermixing of all of that, it does really pull out, like, stories are what we have. When you are a part of diaspora in disconnection, in the incredibly traumatic and violent disconnection that slavery was, and also like coerced or forced movement and migration, and what that does to your stories and to your disconnection around your identity, your ancestry, your family narrative. This is what we have. Stories are what we have, right? And so I think there's the seeking of the story, of the truth, the different perspectives and the different kind of narratives and maybe intentions behind that narrative. That's what we, like, as the reader, that's what you need in order to actually paint the full picture for yourself. And the other thing I was going to say too is that with Milkman going on this journey and seeking these stories and trying to find the truth and trying to find, just more about himself and where he comes from and his family, there is also this, I think, like, under that, he definitely cites like this need for freedom, this desire for freedom, right? Like, I've been my father's office boy my whole life. As long as I'm here, I'm a part of my family. Everybody's using me. Everybody wants something from me. I need to get out. I need to be my own man, just like find freedom in that way. And so that, I see that as like a flight towards freedom in a very similar, and like a similar way that like parallels his ancestors, like Solomon's flight to freedom, right? But what he finds is that it's not the gold, it's not really the sense of independence that he can do it all himself, but that he has to go home, and that I think that question of like, what is it that you then come back for or would come back for, and what really is this interplay of freedom and interdependence, rather than, freedom means I need to be all on my own. I don't know. So that's
I think you do. I think that was beautiful. And this notion of, and do we make it back out alive if we do go home, if we can, right? And I'm glad you said that, Jay, because I think geography is also a character in the novel, right? This notion of the juxtaposition of the Great Lakes communities, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then I was looking up the routes, seeing Ohio and the Virginia, West Virginia, then they come from the South. And I don't know if you guys thought this, but I just kept thinking, wow, you're just so close, but not in Canada. Just so close, right? And I kept thinking of Ishmael Reed's Flight to Canada, right? Or Uncle Tom's Cabin, and this notion of what it meant to be above the Mason-Dixon line and what it was in 1931. And in some ways, I think you're right, Jay, Milkman is still a slave, although he's not shackled literally. He's enslaved in other ways, which are still direct subsequent consequences of the system of slavery, right? and then how we enslave ourselves based upon what the expectations that other people have of us. And how can you seek redemption, right? You go back to the source. And then that way, then I go back to where we started, that maybe this is Morrison, right, who wrote her dissertation on William Faulkner. This is her epic, right? This is her saying this is no different than Odysseus, right? This is no different than maybe Sophocles, right? And Oedipus, right? Yes, we have these things that are just important, but it comes down to these epic struggles of who you are, the courage that you have to be in, and what are we going to do? You were talking about Pilate, and no deep dive research, but my Google dive research, I Googled all the ways in which someone could be born without a navel, and all of them were not nice, right? It involves some type of surgery or the intestines or things being on outside the body, which in this fictionalized text didn't have. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that fiction has to be based in reality, but just the fact that there was no like kind of medical reason why someone would not have a navel, I'm convinced, she was otherworldly to begin with, right? And in that way, it was the only way she could come in, right? And maybe that was her job, like she was one of the gods sent down to help these, like Greek mythology, right? One of the gods come down and take pity. And in that way, maybe if we aren't loved as American citizens or descendants of African slaves, at least the gods love you, right? However you want to identify with them. So yeah, I see it as an epic of good and bad, of fate, of free will, of tragedy, and even in the tragedy of love. But maybe this is what life is about, right? And maybe this helps us, kind of like your appropriate reference to The Color Purple. We have to learn how to deal with it as gracefully as we can. I'm not saying I'm capable of it, but the characters, I think, they try, right? Or at least our protagonist, Milkman, does. Yeah. You kept thinking about Alice Walker. I kept thinking about Zora Neale Hurston when I was reading that, especially when it gets to Sweet, the prostitute, who bathes him, and you see the transformation of Milkman, and he learns to reciprocate, right? Where with Hagar, he didn't have the ability to have reciprocity.
Right.
And I think of Sweat, right? That short story where it's all about a snake, and she helps the murder of her husband, by the end of that story. And here by 1977, it becomes a different one. I think one question maybe we might want to consider, here you have Morrison having a male, constructed male protagonist, where I think the prior books, Is It Sula and the Bluest Eye, were female protagonists, where here it closely centers on a Black constructed male. Any thoughts on that? I always think of that. And not that we don't have female stories, but I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I want to get into that. Unfortunately, we'll have to do it in the bonus because we are out of time for
we talked too much? Okay.
Listen, this was so good.
I have at least
have y'all
like
talk
30 more things.
Okay, me too.
Right, good. We're gonna get into it. Because yes, I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about how Milkman is literally kept alive, like he is, born from a Black woman, and he is literally kept alive throughout the novel, through the efforts, through the love.
Try to be murdered in the womb, right? Like, didn't she sit on a needle? Made her drink castor oil. So even in the womb,
but like
kill him.
His mother, his sisters, Hagar, Pilate, every woman that he comes across, is responsible for keeping him quite literally alive. And I want to talk about all of that and more in the bonus. But it is time to head to the Freakouts. We'll be right back.
We all need a little emotional support from time to time, but don't always have the resources or access to the support that understands us. I know it would have been life-changing if during the height of the online abuse against me, to have anyone else who understood what I was going through. That's why me and my team built the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. We provide free, confidential, emotional support for people who make and play games. Because we are people who make and play games too, and we get it. You can learn more by texting info to 23368 from anywhere in the US, or visit gameshotline.org. That's info to 23368 or gameshotline.org.
It is now time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Jay, do you have a freak out for us?
I do. I want to freak out about this memoir I read recently called "Everything Sad Is Untrue." I'm not a big memoir reader. It's by Daniel Nayeri. But I picked this book up, not gonna lie, because the cover was really beautiful and the title
That's
sounded
legit.
cool. But I'm so glad I did, because it is written in such a kind of genre bending and fascinating way, and actually not too kind of related to our conversation here. Similar to Song of Solomon, it takes like a real life kind of memoir, more traditional memoir story, and interlocks and intersperses it with stories of ancestors or family or anything else, but written kind of more in a fictional way. It uses this Scheherazade kind of framework that is really, really fascinating. Those stories are told with cliffhangers. So that it wants you to keep reading on, and then that's when it cuts to like the more real life stories of like growing up as an Iranian kid in white America, and then cutting to the next Scheherazade kind of ancestor story. It was just really fascinating in the way that as you read it, it blurs like what is real. Like, is this a story, or is this actually your grandfather, or and who told you this, and how did you learn it? And then learning new things, and asking his mother later about certain stories that he had heard and told us. Really just it's done in this just really fascinating and cool way that I feel like, even though I'm not an Iranian immigrant myself, I felt so many feelings about the way it captures the experience of diaspora. It was just really beautiful. So that's what I'm freaking out about.
And who was the author?
Daniel Nayeri.
Daniel Nayeri. And is this a fairly recent?
It's a fairly
release?
recent book.
This is dope.
Yeah, I was
I'm
on
gonna check this
the
out.
new shelf at the library, and I was like,
So you were just
cover.
moonwalking through the library looking for something to read, and you were like, this is it. This is my read. It turned out to be great. I missed that shit. I miss being in libraries, pulling stuff off shelves. Like, I'm, fully in that Kindle life now, where, I'm
me too.
staying up too late, like reading on my phone, whatever.
I know, it's so addictive before you realize it's like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and you're on your Kindle.
Exactly, but I miss the physical sensation of walking through a library and choosing something purely because I like the weight of the book. I like the way that it is shaped. I love the colors. I just love the way that it's put together. And I discovered so much. Back in the day when I was little nerdy Ebony, and I was an inside kid. Bye. You know what, Ty? I invite you on this podcast to be nice, and then this is how you're gonna try.
I think nerdy is a compliment. I own it. I embrace my nerdiness.
Yeah, try and redeem yourself now. What are you freaking out about this week?
2 things: the discussion of Black female nomination for the Supreme Court, and the discussion of qualifications, right? And also the continued shooting of Black male bodies and Black bodies just in general by the police. And in thinking about Song of Solomon, it's a fictional text, but she historically makes reference constantly to historic moments in history, from Lincoln to the Civil War to the failure of Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau. And thinking about this novel set in 1977, it made me sad, because here we are in 2022, still dealing with the same issues around race. So that is, to me, what I'm concerned with. And I am a politics and news junkie. So I love to read literature in so much as I can use it as a commentary on the contemporary racial and political state of things. So just kind of, I'm hopeful, but also disappointed in our democracy, because it seems like we really haven't moved since the failure of Reconstruction. We're still arguing over the same things. And although Song of Solomon starts in 1931 and like moves right through that as Milkman ages, in some ways Milkman could be a character that exists today.
I curate my social feed, as we all do, in such a way that I don't often encounter people who hold views that are radically different to mine. And I, do this for not just my own enjoyment, but also for my own safety, right? My own, soul health. And so, the discussions that people have been having about, for instance, a potential Black female nominee to the Supreme Court, I'm hearing Black women talk about it, right? For the most part, popping on Twitter or, people on Facebook or whatever. And yeah, it is astounding to me how often we have these same conversations because the base assumptions have never been fully addressed. So when you have people who are like this gentleman, you hear the tone of my voice as I say this, from, is it Georgetown Law, who's currently been suspended for, his statement that, this one nominee who is Indian American would be a fantastic nominee and is in fact the preeminent nominee, but won't get nominated, in favor of some lesser Black candidate. And the verbal gymnastics people have to do as they try and clean up these statements that reveal what they truly believe, which is that no Black candidate will ever be good enough. Anytime we achieve anything, it is purely because of, woke politics, identity politics, that we are always in a position of having to defend ourselves, sell ourselves. It's just, at what point do we attack like the fundamental assumptions that undergird these things, such that these people who are recognized, luminaries and scholars in their own right, can have such horribly misinformed and judgmental beliefs about a whole.
I don't think it's misinformed. I mean, I think it's white supremacy, but to bring it back,
that's what it is. Yeah.
But so they know, right? So to bring it back, because I think there's a point in the book where they talk about you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to work hard enough. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe Morrison's work, like anybody's work, is a blueprint of how you might survive, right? Depending on what resonates with you. So I know this sounds really kind of Schoolhouse Rockish, but I think of that if you have all these beautiful characters inside Song of Solomon, let me figure out today what character I'm close enough to. What character would I be in the novel? And then if I don't like the ending or I don't like what the character is experiencing, how can I learn from what the character did and maybe shift myself or my life or my choices to have a different outcome, right? Who am I in the text, right? And that's a very personal, intimate thing to say, but maybe that's what we do. And maybe that's how we figure out how to survive, right? If my goal is to be Pilate or to figure out where my magic is, how can I do that as a way to survive? Because if I'm dependent on those people, like who we're talking about, the Supreme Court nominee, like that's never going to shift. And I think we didn't talk about this too, that except for, is it Jeffries who married the white woman? Pretty much there are no white people in the text, right? I think Mr. Smith. So it's a holy, and Morrison is known for this, right? Wholly autonomous communities, right? Hurston does the same thing. That even in spite of that, we still have power to be responsible for ourselves. So who am I in the text? And then how do I figure out where I go once the text helps me better see who I am in my goodness and in my challenges or the burdens that carry. And maybe we can put this on a t-shirt. Where are my bones?
Okay, come on now. I love this. I don't have a freak out for this week, and I don't need one because Tai and Jae brought the heat, as I knew they would. If you would like to bring the heat, you can submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Y'all, thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Next week, Anita is going to take it back to the beginning. She's going to be talking video games, where all the feminist frequency magic began, with an amazing group of folks, so you do not want to miss it. Our show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork is by Jamie Barron, and our intro music is by Phil Serkis. Thanks for listening. Bye, y'all.